A racist woman named Karen refuses to let a black child, Landon, swim in the community pool. But what Landon's mother, Jasmine, does next leaves everyone speechless. What does Jasmine really do, and how does she handle the blatant racism? Let's find out. Before we get into the story, comment below where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The sun beat down on Oakwood Estates, a pristine suburban neighborhood where manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges line the streets. At the heart of this affluent community stood its crown jewel, the Oakwood Community Pool. With its crystal-clear water and modern facilities, the pool wasn't just a place to cool off. It was a symbol of the comfort and privilege enjoyed by those who called Oakwood home. On this particular Saturday afternoon, the air buzzed with the promise of summer. Children's laughter echoed through the neighborhood, mixing with the gentle hum of lawnmowers and the occasional bark of a well-groomed dog. The scent of freshly cut grass and barbecue smoke wafted through the air, creating an atmosphere of relaxation and contentment. As residents made their way to the pool, they exchanged friendly waves and casual greetings. Some carried colorful beach towels and coolers filled with refreshments, while others balanced stacks of fashion magazines and sunscreen bottles. The community vibe was one of casual elegance, where everyone seemed to know each other, and newcomers were a rarity. Among the crowd heading towards the pool were Jasmine and her son Landon. Jasmine, a striking woman in her mid-30s, walked with the confidence of someone who knew her worth. Her dark skin glowed in the sunlight, and her natural hair was styled in neat, protective braids. She wore a fashionable one-piece swimsuit under a light cover-up, her beach bag slung casually over one shoulder. "Mom, can we hurry?" Landon asked, tugging at Jasmine's hand. At 8 years old, Landon was the picture of youthful energy. His bright eyes sparkled with excitement, and his wide smile revealed a missing front tooth. He wore blue swim trunks decorated with cartoon sharks and clutched a pair of goggles in his free hand. Jasmine laughed, quickening her pace slightly. "Slow down, buddy. The pool isn't going anywhere." As they walked, Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. As a successful lawyer specializing in civil rights cases, she had worked hard to provide this life for her son. Moving to Oakwood Estates had been a big step, but she believed in leading by example. Integration and representation were important to her, and she wanted Landon to grow up in a diverse environment. "Remember what we talked about, Landon," Jasmine said as they approached the pool gate. "What do we do if anyone is unkind?" Landon rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "I know, Mom. We stay calm and use our words. Can we go swim now?" Jasmine ruffled his hair affectionately. "That's my boy. Go on then. I'll be right behind you." As Landon darted through the gate, Jasmine noticed a group of women lounging by the pool's edge. Among them was Mrs. Karen Whitefield, a fixture of the Oakwood social scene. Mrs. Whitefield, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer sundress, embodied the old guard of the neighborhood. She sat perched on the edge of her lounge chair, sunglasses pushed up on her head as she surveyed the pool area like a queen overlooking her domain. Jasmine had encountered Mrs. Whitefield at several community events since moving in. While always polite on the surface, there was an undercurrent of tension in their interactions. Mrs. Whitefield had a way of making comments that, while not overtly offensive, left Jasmine feeling uneasy. A shout of pure joy erupted from the pool's edge. Landon, unable to contain his excitement any longer, he sprinted towards the pool's edge, arms pumping, a wide grin on his face. Just as he was about to leap, a hand shot out, grabbing his arm and jerking him to a stop. "Now, just a minute, young man," Mrs. Whitefield said, her voice stern. "I don't believe I've seen you here before. Are you a resident?" Landon looked up at her, confusion clouding his features. I live here with my mom," he stammered, pointing towards Jasmine. Mrs. Whitefield's grip on Landon's arm tightened slightly. "I'm sorry, but I can't just take your word for it. This pool is for residents only, and I don't recognize you." Jasmine was already moving, her protective instincts kicking in. "Karen, what are you doing? Let go of my son." Mrs. Whitefield turned to face Jasmine, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Jasmine, I'm sure you understand. We have to be careful about who we let use the facilities. There have been incidents in the past with outsiders causing trouble. The atmosphere around the pool had shifted. Other residents were watching the scene unfold, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. Landon stood frozen, his earlier excitement replaced by uncertainty and a touch of fear. Jasmine reached her son, gently removing Mrs. Whitefield's hand from his arm. "Karen, we are residents. We've lived here for 6 months. Landon has every right to swim in this pool." Mrs. Whitefield's eyes narrowed. "Well, I've never seen him here before. And frankly, I find it hard to believe that you've been here for 6 months without using the pool. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding about your status here." The implication in Mrs. Whitefield's words was clear, and Jasmine felt a familiar anger rising in her chest. She had dealt with this kind of subtle racism before, but to see it directed at her son was almost more than she could bear. Jasmine, still standing at the pool's edge with Landon by her side, took a deep breath and decided to give diplomacy one more chance. "Mrs. Whitefield," Jasmine began, her voice calm but firm, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We are residents here. We've lived at 1542 Oakwood Drive for the past 6 months. I'm sure if we just talk this through, we can resolve this peacefully." Mrs. Whitefield's lips thinned into a tight line. She glanced around at the other pool-goers, many of whom were now watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Squaring her shoulders, she turned back to Jasmine. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "I'm sure you understand that as a member of the Neighborhood Watch, it's my responsibility to ensure that only residents use our facilities." Jasmine felt her patience wearing thin, but she kept her composure. "I appreciate your dedication to the community, Mrs. Whitefield. However, as I've said, we are residents. We have every right to be here." Mrs. Whitefield's eyes narrowed. "Well, if that's true, I'm sure you won't mind showing me some proof of residency. After all, it's strange that in 6 months, no one has seen you use the pool before." The implication in Mrs. Whitefield's words was clear, and Jasmine felt a surge of anger. She was about to respond when Landon tugged at her hand. "Mom," he whispered, his eyes wide with confusion and a hint of fear. "Why doesn't she believe us? Did we do something wrong?" Jasmine's heart clenched at the uncertainty in her son's voice. She knelt down beside him, speaking softly. "No, sweetie, we haven't done anything wrong. Sometimes people have wrong ideas about others, and it's our job to help them understand better." As Jasmine comforted her son, murmurs began to ripple through the gathered crowd. Some of the onlookers were nodding in agreement with Mrs. Whitefield, while others looked uncomfortable with the situation. "I've never seen them here before," one woman whispered to her friend. "But does that mean they're not residents?" her companion replied, uncertainty clear in her voice. An older man standing nearby cleared his throat. "Now, Karen," he said, addressing Mrs. Whitefield, "don't you think you're being a bit hasty? I've seen Mrs. Johnson at the community center a few times." Mrs. Whitefield turned to the man, her expression hardening. "Frank, I appreciate your input, but you know as well as I do that we need to be cautious. The community pool is for residents only, and we can't just let anyone waltz in here without proper verification." Jasmine stood up, her patience finally reaching its limit. "Mrs. Whitefield," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent pool area, "I want to be very clear. What you're doing right now is discrimination. We are residents of this community, and we have every right to use this pool." Mrs. Whitefield's face flushed red. "Discrimination? How dare you? I'm simply trying to protect our community. People like you always jump to playing the race card when things don't go your way." A collective gasp went up from the onlookers. Mrs. Whitefield's mask of politeness had finally slipped, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath. Jasmine felt a cold fury settle over her. She'd dealt with racism before, but to see it directed at her child in what was supposed to be their home was almost more than she could bear. She took a deep breath, centering herself. "People like me, Mrs. Whitefield?" Jasmine asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" Mrs. Whitefield seemed to realize she'd overstepped, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Well, you know," she said, waving her hand vaguely. People who aren't familiar with our community standards. People who might not appreciate the privilege of living in a place like Oakwood Estates. The tension around the pool was palpable. Some of the residents were nodding in agreement with Mrs. Whitefield, while others looked deeply uncomfortable. A few had the decency to look ashamed. Jasmine felt Landon press closer to her side, and she put a protective arm around him. She knew she had to handle this carefully, not just for her own sake, but for Landon's and for every other family that might face this kind of discrimination in the future. Mrs. Whitefield, Jasmine began, her voice clear and steady. I want you to listen to me very carefully. What you're doing right now is not just morally wrong, it's illegal. As a lawyer, I can tell you that your actions constitute racial discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. Mrs. Whitefield's eyes widened, but Jasmine continued before she could interject. Furthermore, as residents of this community, we have a contractual right to use all common areas, including this pool. By attempting to deny us access, you're not only violating federal law, but also breaching the HOA agreement that every resident here has signed. Jasmine paused, letting her words sink in. She could see the impact they were having, not just on Mrs. Whitefield, but on the other residents as well. Some were looking at Mrs. Whitefield with new eyes, seemingly realizing for the first time the seriousness of her actions. Now, Jasmine continued, I'm going to say this one more time. My son and I are residents of Oakwood Estates. We have every right to be here, and we will not be intimidated or made to feel unwelcome in our own community. A tense silence fell over the pool area. Mrs. Whitefield stood frozen, her face a mix of anger and uncertainty. For a moment, it seemed like the confrontation might be over. But then, Mrs. Whitefield's expression hardened. Well, she said, her voice shrill, if you're so certain of your rights, you won't mind waiting here while I call security. I'm sure they can sort this all out. Jasmine felt a flicker of disbelief. Security? Mrs. Whitefield, this is completely unnecessary. We've explained our situation, and I've outlined the legal implications of your actions. Calling security will only escalate this situation further. But Mrs. Whitefield was already pulling out her phone. I'm sorry, but I feel unsafe, she declared loudly, her eyes darting around as if seeking support from the other residents. You're being aggressive, and I have a responsibility to protect this community. Jasmine couldn't believe what she was hearing. She, a professional woman standing calmly with her 8-year-old son, was being portrayed as a threat. The absurdity of the situation would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. As Mrs. Whitefield dialed, Jasmine turned to the other residents. Is this really what our community stands for? She asked, her voice carrying across the pool area. Is this the example we want to set for our children? Some of the onlookers had the grace to look ashamed, but others still seemed uncertain, caught between their discomfort with Mrs. Whitefield's actions and their own ingrained biases. Landon tugged at Jasmine's hand. Mom, he whispered, his voice trembling slightly, maybe we should just go home. I don't want to swim anymore. Jasmine's heart broke at the dejection in her son's voice. She knelt down beside him, looking him in the eye. Landon, listen to me. We have every right to be here. Sometimes when people treat us unfairly, it's important to stand up for ourselves. It's not always easy, but it's how we make things better. Do you understand? Landon nodded slowly, his young face serious. Like in your stories about the civil rights movement. Jasmine smiled, feeling a surge of pride. That's right, sweetheart. Just like that. We're not going anywhere. As Jasmine stood back up, she noticed a ripple of movement through the crowd. A young woman stepped forward, her face flushed with what looked like a mix of embarrassment and determination. Mrs. Whitefield, the woman said, her voice shaking slightly, I don't think you should call security. I've seen Mrs. Johnson and her son at the community center. They are residents. Mrs. Whitefield, who had been speaking rapidly into her phone, paused. Emily, dear, I appreciate your input, but you don't understand the full situation here. Another voice piped up, this time from an elderly man near the pool's edge. Karen, I think you're the one who doesn't understand. What you're doing isn't right. These folks have as much right to be here as any of us. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The tide was beginning to turn. Mrs. Whitefield looked around, her composure slipping. I'm just trying to protect our community, she stammered, but her words lacked their earlier conviction. Jasmine seized the moment. Mrs. Whitefield, she said, her voice firm but not unkind, I understand that you believe you're acting in the best interest of the community. But what you're doing is harmful. It's harmful to my son, who now feels unwelcome in his own neighborhood. It's harmful to this community, which should be a place of inclusivity and respect. And ultimately, it's harmful to you because it reinforces prejudices that have no place in our society. She paused, looking around at the gathered residents. I moved to Oakwood Estates because I believed it was a place where my son could grow up in a diverse, welcoming environment. I still believe that, but it's up to all of us to make that a reality. The pool area was silent as Jasmine's words sank in. Even Mrs. Whitefield seemed at a loss for words. The tension at the Oakwood Estates community pool was palpable as everyone waited for the arrival of security. Jasmine stood her ground, her arm protectively around Landon, while Mrs. Whitefield paced nervously, occasionally glancing at her phone as if willing it to ring again. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, a golf cart with security emblazoned on the side pulled up to the pool area. From it emerged an older black man, his salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed and his uniform crisp despite the summer heat. His name tag read Mr. Johnson. As he approached, Mr. Johnson's eyes swept over the scene, taking in the tense atmosphere and the cluster of onlookers. His expression remained neutral, but there was a weariness in his eyes that suggested he'd seen this kind of situation before. "Good afternoon, folks," he said, his deep voice calm and authoritative. "I received a call about a disturbance. Can someone fill me in on what's happening here?" Mrs. Whitefield stepped forward immediately, her voice high-pitched with nervous energy. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, Mr. Johnson. This woman," she gestured towards Jasmine, "claims to be a resident, but I've never seen her use the pool before. I was simply trying to verify her status when she became confrontational." Jasmine opened her mouth to respond, but Mr. Johnson held up a hand, silencing them both. "Let's take this one step at a time," he said. "Ma'am," he addressed Jasmine, "could you please state your name and address?" "Certainly," Jasmine replied, her voice steady. "I'm Jasmine Thompson. My son Landon and I live at 1542 Oakwood Drive. We've been residents here for 6 months." Mr. Johnson nodded, pulling out a tablet from his pocket. He tapped on the screen a few times, his brow furrowed in concentration. After a moment, he looked up. "Mrs. Thompson, I can confirm that you are indeed listed as a resident of Oakwood Estates," he said. "You and your son have full rights to use all community facilities, including this pool." A collective murmur went through the crowd. Mrs. Whitefield's face flushed red, a mix of embarrassment and indignation. But I've never seen them here before," she sputtered. "How can we be sure they're not just using someone else's address?" Mr. Johnson turned to Mrs. Whitefield, his expression stern. "Ma'am, our records are up to date and accurate. Mrs. Thompson and her son are legitimate residents. Your concerns have been addressed, and I must ask you to cease this line of questioning immediately." Mrs. Whitefield fell silent, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Jasmine felt a surge of vindication, but she knew this wasn't over. She had to do something to prevent this from happening again, not just to her and Landon, but to anyone else who might face similar discrimination in the future. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine made a decision. She turned to Landon, who had been watching the proceedings with wide, anxious eyes. "Landon, sweetie," she said softly, "why don't you go ahead and swim? That's what we came here for. After all." Landon looked up at her, uncertainty written across his face. "Are you sure, Mom? What about?" His eyes darted towards Mrs. Whitefield. Jasmine smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry about her. Mr. Johnson has confirmed that we have every right to be here. Go on, enjoy the pool. Show everyone that this is your home too." After a moment's hesitation, Landon nodded. He walked to the edge of the pool, took a deep breath, and jumped in with a splash. The sound of his laughter as he surfaced seemed to break some of the tension in the air. As Landon began to swim, Jasmine pulled out her phone. She opened the camera app and switched it to video mode. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "Hello, Oakwood Estates community," she said, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Jasmine Thompson, and I'm recording this message to address an incident that occurred today at our community pool." The crowd, which had begun to disperse after Mr. Johnson's confirmation, now turned back to watch. Mrs. Whitefield's eyes widened in alarm. "Today, my son and I were subjected to racial profiling and discrimination by a fellow resident," Jasmine continued. "We were accused of not belonging here, of not having the right to use facilities that we, as residents, are entitled to use." She panned the camera around, capturing the faces of the onlookers, many of whom looked uncomfortable. "I want to be clear, this is not acceptable. Oakwood Estates claims to be a welcoming community for all, but actions like these tell a different story. We cannot claim to value diversity and inclusion while allowing such blatant discrimination to occur." Jasmine's voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by the injustice of the situation and her determination to make a change. To those who stood by silently today, I want you to ask yourselves, is this the community you want to live in? One where your neighbors are treated with suspicion based on the color of their skin? Where children are made to feel unwelcome in their own neighborhood? She turned the camera to show Landon, happily swimming in the pool. "This is my son, Landon. He's 8 years old. He loves to swim, to play basketball, to ride his bike through the streets of what he thought was his home. Today, he learned that some people don't think he belongs here. Is that the lesson we want to teach our children?" Mrs. Whitefield, who had been watching this unfold with growing horror, suddenly stepped forward. "Stop that. You can't record me without my permission." Jasmine turned the camera towards Mrs. Whitefield, capturing her outburst. "Mrs. Whitefield, this is a public space. I have every right to document what happens here, especially when it involves discrimination against my family." Mrs. Whitefield's face contorted with anger. "You people always play the race card. I was just trying to protect our community. If you can't understand that, maybe you don't belong here after all." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Mrs. Whitefield's words hung in the air, their racist implications impossible to ignore. Jasmine, her voice remaining calm, addressed the camera again. "And there you have it, Oakwood Estates. This is the ugly truth that lurks beneath the surface of our welcoming community. This is what we're up against." She turned back to Mrs. Whitefield, who seemed to realize too late the gravity of what she'd said. "Mrs. Whitefield, I want you to know that your words and actions today don't just hurt me and my son. They hurt our entire community. They perpetuate stereotypes and biases that have no place in our society." Mrs. Whitefield, her face now pale, tried to backtrack. I didn't mean. You're twisting my words." But Jasmine wasn't finished. She addressed the camera once more. "To my fellow residents of Oakwood Estates, I ask you this. What kind of community do we want to be? One that turns a blind eye to racism and discrimination? Or one that stands up for what's right, that truly embraces diversity and inclusion?" She panned the camera around one last time, capturing the shocked and thoughtful faces of the onlookers. "The choice is ours. We can do better. We must do better. For the sake of our children, for the sake of our community, and for the sake of our shared humanity." With that, Jasmine ended the recording. The pool area was silent. The only sound the splash of water as Landon continued to swim, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding around him. Mr. Johnson, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mix of admiration and concern, stepped forward. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I want you to know that I will be filing a full report about this incident. What happened here today was unacceptable, and I assure you it will be addressed at the highest levels of our community management." Jasmine nodded, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate that." Mrs. Whitefield, seeming to finally grasp the severity of the situation, tried one last time to salvage her reputation. I'm sorry if my words came across as offensive. That wasn't my intent. I was just trying to follow the rules." But her words fell flat. The damage had been done, and everyone knew it. One by one, other residents began to approach Jasmine. Some offered words of support, others apologies for not speaking up sooner. A few even thanked her for having the courage to address the issue head-on. As the crowd began to disperse, Jasmine called Landon out of the pool. He came bounding over, water dripping from his swim trunks, a big smile on his face. "Did you see me, Mom? I did a cannonball." Jasmine couldn't help but smile, despite the heaviness in her heart. "I saw, sweetie. You were amazing." As they gathered their things to leave, Jasmine noticed Mrs. Whitefield sitting alone on a lounge chair, her head in her hands. For a moment, she felt a twinge of sympathy. Change was never easy, and confronting one's own biases could be painful. But then she remembered the hurt in Landon's eyes when he'd been made to feel unwelcome, and her resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about one incident or one person. It was about creating a truly inclusive community, one where everyone felt welcome and valued. As they walked out of the pool area, Landon looked up at his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice serious, "are we still allowed to come back to the pool?" Jasmine stopped and knelt down to meet her son's eyes. "Of course we are, sweetheart. This is our home, and that pool belongs to us just as much as it does to anyone else. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." Landon nodded, a small smile returning to his face. "Okay, Mom, can we come back tomorrow?" Jasmine laughed, ruffling his damp hair. "We sure can, buddy. We sure can." As they walked home in the warm evening air, Jasmine thought about the video she'd recorded. She knew posting it would cause a stir in the community, maybe even make some people angry. But she also knew it was necessary. Sometimes, the only way to effect change was to shine a light on the darkness, to force people to confront uncomfortable truths. She pulled out her phone and opened the community Facebook group. With a deep breath, she uploaded the video and typed out a simple caption: "A call for change in Oakwood Estates. Let's build a truly inclusive community together." As she hit post, Jasmine felt a mix of anxiety and hope. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain: things in Oakwood Estates were about to change. The next morning, Jasmine woke up to find her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. The video had gone viral within the Oakwood Estates community, sparking heated discussions and debates. Some residents expressed shock and outrage at Mrs. Whitefield's behavior, while others defended her, claiming she was just trying to follow the rules. As Jasmine scrolled through the comments, she saw a notification for an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for that evening. The topic? Addressing recent community concerns and promoting inclusivity. She smiled to herself. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. Change was coming to Oakwood Estates, one conversation at a time. Throughout the day, Jasmine received a flood of messages from neighbors she'd never spoken to before. Many expressed their support and apologized for not speaking up at the pool. Others shared their own experiences with subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, discrimination within the community. One message in particular caught her attention. It was from Emily, the young woman who had first spoken up in support of Jasmine at the pool. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, I can't stop thinking about what happened yesterday. I feel ashamed that I didn't do more to help sooner. Your courage in standing up to Mrs. Whitefield and addressing the whole community has inspired me. I want to help make Oakwood Estates a truly welcoming place for everyone. Is there anything I can do? Sincerely, Emily." Jasmine felt a surge of hope as she read the message. This was exactly the kind of response she had hoped for, people willing to acknowledge the problem and actively work towards a solution. As evening approached, Jasmine prepared to attend the HOA meeting. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was professional yet approachable. She wanted to project strength and determination, but also openness to dialogue. "Landon," she called out, "Mrs. Rodriguez from next door is going to watch you while I'm at the meeting. Be good, okay?" Landon looked up from his video game. "Mom, are you going to talk about what happened at the pool?" Jasmine nodded, sitting down next to him. "Yes, sweetie. I'm going to try to make sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else." Landon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm glad we didn't leave, Mom. I'm glad we stayed and showed them we belong here." Jasmine felt her eyes well up with tears. She pulled Landon into a hug. "Me too, baby. Me too." As she walked to the community center where the meeting was being held, Jasmine felt a mix of nervousness and determination. She knew that what she was about to do wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. For Landon, for herself, and for every other family that might face discrimination in the future. The community center was packed when she arrived. It seemed like half the neighborhood had turned out for the meeting. As Jasmine made her way to an empty seat, she could feel eyes on her, some curious, some supportive, and some hostile. The HOA president, a middle-aged man named Tom, called the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. As you all know, we're here to discuss a situation that occurred at our community pool yesterday. We've all seen the video that Mrs. Thompson posted, and I think it's clear that we need to have a serious conversation about inclusivity in our community. Jasmine took a deep breath. This was it, the turning point. Whatever happened next would shape the future of Oakwood Estates. As she stood up to address the crowd, she silently promised Landon that she would do everything in her power to make their home a place where he could grow up feeling truly welcome and valued. The room fell silent as Jasmine began to speak, her voice clear and strong. Good evening, neighbors. My name is Jasmine Thompson, and yesterday my son and I experienced something that no one should ever have to go through in their own community. As she shared her story, Jasmine could see the impact her words were having. Some people looked ashamed, others angry, and still others seemed to be truly hearing about the reality of racial discrimination for the first time. When she finished speaking, there was a moment of heavy silence. Then, slowly, people began to raise their hands, eager to share their own thoughts and experiences. The conversation that followed was difficult, sometimes heated, but ultimately productive. By the end of the meeting, several concrete steps had been proposed. Diversity and inclusion training for all residents, review of community policies to ensure they were equitable, and the formation of a community outreach committee to welcome new residents of all backgrounds. As Jasmine left the meeting, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. It wasn't perfect, and there was still a long way to go, but it was a start. A real, tangible start. Walking home under the starry sky, Jasmine allowed herself a small smile. She thought of Landon, probably still up playing his video games, blissfully unaware of the changes his bravery had set in motion. "We belong here," she whispered to herself, her voice full of determination. "And we're going to make sure everyone knows it." The morning after the emergency HOA meeting, Jasmine woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The community's response to her video and the subsequent meeting had been encouraging, but she knew that real change would require more than just words and promises. As she sipped her morning coffee, an idea began to form in her mind. Jasmine reached for her phone and dialed a familiar number. After a few rings, a warm voice answered, "Equal Rights Now, this is Marcus speaking. How can I help you?" "Marcus, it's Jasmine Thompson," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I need your help with something important." For the next hour, Jasmine and Marcus, her longtime colleague at the civil rights organization she frequently worked with, hashed out a plan. By the time she hung up, a smile played on her lips. This was going to be big. Meanwhile, across Oakwood Estates, phones were buzzing with notifications. Jasmine's video had spread like wildfire through the community's social media channels. Residents who hadn't been at the pool or the emergency meeting were now seeing firsthand the discrimination that had taken place in their own backyard. Sarah, a young mother who lived a few doors down from Jasmine, watched the video with growing horror. "Oh my God, Mark," she called to her husband. "You have to see this. It's Mrs. Whitefield from down the street. I can't believe she would say such things." Mark came over, his brow furrowed as he watched. "This is unacceptable," he muttered. "We can't let this kind of behavior go unchallenged in our community." Similar scenes were playing out in homes all over Oakwood Estates. The video was sparking conversations about race, privilege, and what it truly meant to be a welcoming community. By midday, the Oakwood Estates community Facebook group was flooded with posts. Many expressed shock and outrage at Mrs. Whitefield's behavior. "I'm disgusted by what I saw in that video. Mrs. Thompson and her son deserve better. We all deserve better. I've lived here for 15 years, and I've never been so ashamed of our community. This needs to change now." Others shared their own experiences with subtle discrimination in the neighborhood. "I always wondered why I got strange looks at community events. Now I know I'm not alone. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, for speaking up." A few tried to defend Mrs. Whitefield, arguing that she was just trying to follow the rules, but they were quickly shouted down by the majority. As the online discussion raged on, the HOA found itself under increasing pressure to take action. Tom, the HOA president, called an emergency board meeting to discuss their response. "We need to do something big," said Lisa, one of the board members. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about the kind of community we want to be." The others nodded in agreement. After hours of debate, they drafted a statement condemning discrimination in all forms and outlining a series of steps they would take to promote inclusivity in Oakwood Estates. Just as they were about to release the statement, Tom's phone rang. It was Jasmine. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice a mix of respect and wariness. "We were just about to release a statement about the incident." "That's good to hear, Tom," Jasmine replied. "But I have a proposal that I think will take our efforts a step further. I've been in touch with Equal Rights Now, a civil rights organization I work with. They're willing to come to Oakwood Estates to conduct a diversity and inclusion seminar for all residents." Tom was silent for a moment, considering the implications. That's a big step, Mrs. Thompson. Are you sure the community is ready for something like that?" Jasmine's voice was firm. "I think the question is, can we afford not to do this? If we truly want to be the welcoming community we claim to be, we need to put in the work." After a brief discussion with the other board members, Tom agreed. "All right, Mrs. Thompson, we'll do it. We'll host the seminar at the community center. But what about Mrs. Whitefield? Do you think she'll attend?" "Leave that to me," Jasmine said, a note of steel in her voice. After hanging up, Jasmine took a deep breath. The next part wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. She walked down the street to Mrs. Whitefield's house and rang the doorbell. Mrs. Whitefield opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise and fear when she saw Jasmine. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't think we should talk without my lawyer present." Jasmine held up a hand. "I'm not here to threaten you, Mrs. Whitefield. I'm here to invite you to be part of the solution." She explained about the upcoming seminar, emphasizing its importance for the community. "Your attendance would send a powerful message, Mrs. Whitefield. It would show that you're willing to learn and grow from this experience." Mrs. Whitefield looked torn. I don't know. Everyone hates me now. Maybe it would be better if I just moved away." Jasmine shook her head. "Running away won't solve anything. This is your chance to make things right, not just with me and Landon, but with the entire community." After a long moment, Mrs. Whitefield nodded. "All right," she said softly. "I'll be there." As Jasmine walked back home, she felt a mixture of emotions. There was still a long way to go, but this was a start. Over the next few days, preparations for the seminar went into full swing. The HOA sent out official invitations to all residents, strongly encouraging attendance. They also released their statement, which was met with widespread approval from the community. The day of the seminar arrived, and the community center was packed. Jasmine stood at the back, watching as her neighbors filed in. She saw Sarah and Mark, the young couple from down the street. Emily, the woman who had first spoken up at the pool, gave Jasmine an encouraging smile as she walked past. And then, just as the seminar was about to begin, Mrs. Whitefield walked in. A hush fell over the room as she made her way to a seat in the back, her head down and her shoulders hunched. Marcus, the facilitator from Equal Rights Now, began the seminar with a powerful statement about the importance of creating truly inclusive communities. As he spoke, Jasmine could see her neighbors listening intently, many nodding in agreement. The seminar covered a wide range of topics, from the history of housing discrimination to the subtle ways bias can manifest in everyday interactions. There were group exercises that encourage people to examine their own prejudices and role-playing scenarios to practice intervening when witnessing discrimination. Throughout it all, Mrs. Whitefield sat quietly, her face a mask of concentration. Jasmine found herself watching the older woman, wondering what was going through her mind. As the seminar drew to a close, Marcus opened the floor for comments. After a moment of hesitation, Mrs. Whitefield stood up. The room went silent. I want to apologize," she began, her voice shaking, "to Mrs. Thompson and her son, to all of you, and to myself. I've lived in this community for 30 years, and I thought I knew what was best for it. But I was wrong. My actions were hurtful and discriminatory, and there's no excuse for that. She turned to face Jasmine directly. Mrs. Thompson, I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you and your son. I hope that one day you can forgive me, and I want you to know that I'm committed to doing better, to being better. Jasmine felt tears pricking at her eyes. She nodded at Mrs. Whitefield, acknowledging her words. Mrs. Whitefield wasn't finished. To all of you, my neighbors, I want to say this. We can do better. We must do better. This seminar has opened my eyes to so much, and I hope it's done the same for all of you. Let's make Oakwood Estates a truly welcoming place for everyone. As Mrs. Whitefield sat down, the room erupted in applause. Jasmine could see tears on many faces, including her own. After the seminar, as people were filing out, Tom approached Jasmine. Mrs. Thompson, on behalf of the HOA, I want to thank you. Not just for organizing this seminar, but for pushing us to be better. We've drafted some new policies that we'd like you to review. They're designed to prevent discrimination and promote inclusivity in our community. Jasmine nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment. I'd be happy to review them, Tom. And thank you for being open to change. As she left the community center, Jasmine felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Mrs. Whitefield standing there. Mrs. Thompson, the older woman said, her voice soft. I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think we could talk sometime? I'd like to learn more about your experiences, if you're willing to share them. Jasmine considered for a moment, then nodded. I think that would be a good idea, Mrs. Whitefield. How about next week? You can come over for coffee. Mrs. Whitefield's face lit up with relief. Thank you. I'd like that very much. As Jasmine walked home, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced in a long time. Change was happening right here in Oakwood Estates. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead, but they were moving in the right direction. She thought of Landon, who was spending the day with his grandmother. She couldn't wait to tell him about the seminar, about Mrs. Whitefield's apology, about the new policies the HOA was implementing. She wanted him to know that his home was becoming a place where he truly belonged, where he was valued and respected. As she reached her front door, Jasmine paused and looked back at the community center. People were still milling about outside, talking animatedly. She saw hugs being exchanged, handshakes, smiles. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few days lifting from her shoulders. They had faced discrimination head-on, and they had come out stronger for it. Oakwood Estates would never be the same, and that was a good thing. Jasmine unlocked her door and stepped inside, already planning her next steps. There was still work to be done, but for now, she allowed herself to savor this victory. They had taken a stand, and their community had risen to the challenge. As she settled onto her couch, Jasmine picked up her phone and started typing out a message to the community Facebook group. Dear neighbors, today, we took an important step towards becoming the inclusive community we aspire to be. The seminar was just the beginning. Let's continue to have these conversations, to challenge our assumptions, and to support one another. Thank you all for your willingness to learn and grow. Together, we can make Oakwood Estates a true home for everyone. Jasmine Thompson. She hit send and leaned back, a smile playing on her lips. The future looked bright, and she was ready to face it head-on. Later that evening, as Jasmine sat on the porch swing with Landon, she tried to put the day's events into words that her 8-year-old could understand. So, did all the grown-ups learn not to be mean today? Landon asked, his legs swinging back and forth. Jasmine chuckled softly. It's not quite that simple, sweetie. But they learned why being mean to someone because of how they look is wrong, and they promised to try and be better. Landon was quiet for a moment, processing this. Even Mrs. Whitefield? He asked finally. Yes, even Mrs. Whitefield, Jasmine confirmed. She's trying to learn and change. That's good, Landon said, nodding sagely. Because it wasn't very nice when she didn't let me swim. Jasmine pulled her son close, planting a kiss on top of his head. You're right, it wasn't nice. But you know what? By standing up for ourselves, by not letting her actions stop us from using the pool, we help make a change. Sometimes, sweetheart, doing the right thing isn't easy. It can be scary and hard, but it's always important to stand up for what's right. Landon looked up at her, his young face serious. Like Martin Luther King? He asked, remembering the stories Jasmine had told him. Exactly like that, Jasmine said, her heart swelling with pride. Every time we stand up against unfairness, we're following in the footsteps of great people like Dr. King. And we're making the world a little bit better. As they sat there, watching the sun set over Oakwood Estates, Jasmine reflected on the progress they'd made and the challenges that still lay ahead. The seminar was a good start, but real change would require ongoing effort and commitment from everyone in the community. She thought about the new policies the HOA was implementing, the follow-up sessions that were being planned, and the conversations that were starting to happen between neighbors who had barely spoken before. It wasn't perfect, and there would undoubtedly be setbacks along the way, but it was progress. Mom, Landon's voice broke into her thoughts. Can we go to the pool tomorrow? Jasmine smiled. Of course we can, sweetie. It's supposed to be a beautiful day. The next afternoon, Jasmine and Landon made their way to the community pool. As they approached the entrance, Jasmine felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. This would be their first time back since the incident with Mrs. Whitefield. But as they walked through the gate, Jasmine's anxiety melted away. The atmosphere was noticeably different from that day a few weeks ago. Residents smiled and waved as they entered, calling out friendly greetings. Hi, Mrs. Thompson. Emily called from her lounge chair. Beautiful day for a swim, isn't it? Sarah and Mark, who were playing with their toddler in the shallow end, waved enthusiastically. Landon, buddy, Mark called out. We've got some new pool toys if you want to try them out. Landon looked up at Jasmine, his eyes shining with excitement. She nodded, giving him a gentle push towards the pool. Go on, have fun. As Landon ran off to join the other children, Jasmine set up their things on a nearby lounge chair. She was just settling in when she noticed Mrs. Whitefield enter the pool area. For a moment, the two women locked eyes across the space. Then, slowly, Mrs. Whitefield raised her hand in a small wave. Jasmine returned the gesture, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Residual anger and hurt, yes, but also a cautious hope for the future. Mrs. Whitefield made her way to a chair on the opposite side of the pool, her movements careful and subdued. She seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than she had that day. As she sat down, Jasmine saw her watching Landon play with the other children, a look of thoughtful reflection on her face. Jasmine turned her attention back to the pool, where Landon was preparing for an epic cannonball. Watch this, Mom, he shouted, before launching himself into the air and hitting the water with a massive splash. As he surfaced, grinning from ear to ear, Jasmine felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This was what they had fought for. The right for Landon to be just another kid having fun at the pool, without fear or prejudice. She watched as Landon played and laughed with the other children, noting how the parents around the pool smiled at his antics. There was no tension, no sideways glances, just the joyful atmosphere of a community pool on a summer afternoon. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the water, Jasmine called out to Landon. Time to go, sweetie. Say goodbye to your friends. Landon climbed out of the pool, water streaming off him as he jogged over to where Jasmine sat. Mom, can't we stay a little longer? He pleaded, his lower lip jutting out in an exaggerated pout. Jasmine laughed, ruffling his wet hair. Not today, buddy, but we can come back tomorrow if you want. Landon's face lit up. Really? Every day? Well, maybe not every day, Jasmine chuckled, but certainly more often than before. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Jasmine noticed Mrs. Whitefield approaching. She tensed slightly, unsure of what to expect. Mrs. Whitefield stopped a respectful distance away, her hands clasped in front of her. Mrs. Thompson, she said, her voice soft but clear, I just wanted to say, it's good to see you and Landon enjoying the pool. As you should be. Jasmine nodded, appreciating the effort it must have taken for Mrs. Whitefield to approach them. Thank you, Mrs. Whitefield. It's good to be here. There was an awkward pause. Then Mrs. Whitefield spoke again. I know I have a lot to learn still, but I want you to know that I'm trying. The seminar opened my eyes to a lot of things. That's good to hear, Jasmine replied, her voice warm but cautious. Change isn't easy, but it's important. For all of us. Mrs. Whitefield nodded, then turned to Landon. "You've got quite a cannonball there, young man," she said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Landon beamed up at her. "Thanks. I've been practicing. Maybe next time you can watch me do a flip." "I'd like that," Mrs. Whitefield said, her smile growing more genuine. As they walked home, hand in hand, Landon looked up at Jasmine. "Mom," he said, his voice thoughtful, "I think Mrs. Whitefield is trying to be nice now." Jasmine squeezed his hand gently. "I think you're right, sweetie. And you know what? That's a very brave thing she's doing. It's not easy to admit when you've been wrong and try to change. Like when I have to say sorry to Tommy next door when I accidentally broke his toy." Landon asked. Jasmine chuckled. "Something like that, yes. But even bigger. Mrs. Whitefield is learning to see the world in a whole new way. It's going to take time, and she might make mistakes along the way. But the important thing is that she's trying." As they reached their front porch, Jasmine paused, looking back at the community spread out before them. Oakwood Estates looked the same as it always had: manicured lawns, tidy houses, tree-lined streets. But she knew that beneath the surface, important changes were taking place. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more difficult conversations, more uncomfortable moments, more work to be done. But standing there, with Landon's small hand in hers, Jasmine felt a sense of hope for the future. "You know what, Landon?" she said, smiling down at her son. "I think we're going to be just fine here." Landon grinned up at her, his eyes sparkling with the simple joy of a child who feels safe and loved. "I know, Mom," he said. "This is our home." As they stepped inside, closing the door behind them, Jasmine felt a sense of peace settle over her. They had faced adversity, stood up for what was right, and in doing so, had helped to create positive change in their community. It wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a beautiful beginning. And as the sun set over Oakwood Estates, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, there was a sense of possibility in the air, a promise of a more inclusive, understanding, and united community for all who called this place home. In the months that followed the pool incident and the diversity seminar, Oakwood Estates underwent a gradual but noticeable transformation. The changes weren't always big or dramatic, but they were significant in their own way. Jasmine found herself at the center of this change, though not by design. Her actions had inspired many in the community to reflect on their own behaviors and attitudes. She was often approached by neighbors seeking advice or simply wanting to share their experiences and insights. The HOA, true to their word, implemented new policies to promote inclusivity. They established a diversity and inclusion committee, with Jasmine as one of its founding members. The committee organized regular events to celebrate the various cultures represented in Oakwood Estates, from food festivals to cultural awareness days. Mrs. Whitefield, to many people's surprise, became one of the most active participants in these new initiatives. She seemed determined to make amends for her past behavior, throwing herself into volunteer work and community outreach. While some residents remained wary of her, many appreciated her efforts to change. Landon, for his part, flourished in this new environment. He became a regular at the community pool, often organizing games and activities for the other children. His openness and friendliness seemed to break down barriers that even adults struggled with, as he played with kids from all backgrounds without a second thought. One sunny Saturday, about 6 months after the incident, Oakwood Estates held its first multicultural fair. The community center and surrounding grounds were transformed into a vibrant celebration of diversity. Food stalls offered cuisine from around the world. Local artists displayed works reflecting various cultural traditions, and a stage hosted performances ranging from African drumming to Chinese lion dancing. Jasmine stood near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she watched her neighbors mingle, try new foods, and engage in conversations with people they might never have spoken to before. "Mrs. Thompson," a voice called out. Jasmine turned to see Mrs. Whitefield approaching, carrying a large tray of homemade cookies. "I hope it's okay, but I made these for the bake sale. It's an old family recipe, but I added a little twist this time, cardamom inspired by that lovely Indian family that moved in last month." Jasmine smiled warmly. "That sounds delicious, Mrs. Whitefield. I'm sure they'll be a hit." As Mrs. Whitefield moved on to the bake sale table, Jasmine felt a tug on her sleeve. It was Landon, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, you gotta come see. Mr. Chun is teaching us how to do Tai Chi." Jasmine let her son lead her to a grassy area where a group of adults and children were following the graceful movements of an elderly Chinese man. She watched as Landon joined in, his face scrunched in concentration as he tried to mirror Mr. Chen's actions. As the day wore on, Jasmine found herself in conversation with Tom, the HOA president. "You know," he said, gesturing at the bustling fair, "none of this would have happened if you hadn't stood up that day at the pool. You really changed things around here, Jasmine." Jasmine shook her head modestly. "I just did what was right. It's everyone in this community who's made the real change. We all had to want it and work for it." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the fair, a local jazz band took the stage. People gathered around, some dancing, others simply swaying to the music. Jasmine spotted Mrs. Whitefield in the crowd, clapping along and chatting animatedly with a young black couple who had recently moved to the neighborhood. Landon came running up, out of breath and grinning from ear to ear. "Mom, this is the best day ever. Can we do this every week?" Jasmine laughed, ruffling his hair. "Maybe not every week, sweetie, but I'm sure we'll do it again. Did you have fun?" Landon nodded enthusiastically. "I learned how to say hello in 5 different languages, and Mrs. Whitefield's cookies were amazing. And Mr. Chen said I'm a natural at Tai Chi." As they walked home later that evening, Landon's hand in hers, Jasmine reflected on how far they'd come. The incident at the pool, painful as it had been, had sparked a change that was transforming their community into something beautiful. She thought about the long road ahead. There would still be challenges, misunderstandings, and difficult conversations. But she felt hopeful. Oakwood Estates was becoming the kind of place she had always dreamed of raising Landon. A place where diversity was celebrated, where people looked out for each other, and where everyone felt like they belonged. As they reached their front porch, Jasmine paused, looking back at the twinkling lights of the fair in the distance. She thought about all the lives that had been touched, all the connections that had been made, all because she had refused to let injustice stand. "You know what, Landon?" she said, smiling down at her son. "I think we're home. Really home." Landon grinned up at her, his eyes heavy with sleep, but still sparkling with the joy of the day. "I know, Mom. It's the best home ever." As they stepped inside, Jasmine felt a deep sense of contentment. They had faced adversity, stood up for what was right, and in doing so, had helped to create a community that was stronger, more inclusive, and more united than ever before. It wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a beautiful new beginning, not just for them, but for everyone in Oakwood Estates. Like Jasmine and Landon, have you ever faced a situation where standing up for what's right was challenging? If yes, how did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put in a lot of time and effort crafting these heartfelt narratives, and your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being a part of this journey.